It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, August 14th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is asking what if in Flyers history.
It's always good to ask what if.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you are watching us over on YouTube, I'm wearing a reminder of the weekly poll on Flyers branding and merchandise. We talked about those Flyers playoff t-shirts, and I am wearing one of them today. It is a classic from 2012 with Scott Hartnell doing the Hulk Hogan pose as he was wont to do back then. So make sure you check out the link in the show notes or over on YouTube. Small bit of Flyers related news. Jacob Gaucher has signed his contract with the Phantoms. It's a 1-year deal, AHL contract. He most notably scored that overtime playoff goal to win the series against the Baby Pens in the playoffs to get the Phantoms advanced in the playoffs for the first time in a few years. So that was a really good moment for him. And I think it was the right call to bring him back.
Yeah, it was. But this is big news because it's the summer.
Well,
we need news.
Well, we've had big news this summer. This is
That's
small
true.
news.
Yeah.
So that is how I'm calling it. But we are going to get to your mailbag questions later in the show. But we are focused today on some sliding doors, if you will, for the Flyers in their history. And I think that you can't have this discussion without first off talking about that Shea Weber offer sheet, because I think that is the biggest thing that this team has ever done that never actually came to fruition.
Yep.
If we recall, it was for a 14-year contract worth $110 million. It was basically, designed to force the Predators to match it. In a lot of ways, I think they really did Weber a solid here.
Well, they definitely did Weber a solid, but I think he lived up to it. The issue is they did it. The Flyers did it to force the Nashville Predators in every way, especially the amount of money that they gave in the first 4 years, the $56 million. Because they looked at things and said, this is going to crush them. And
right. That was the way contracts were structured then, where you could, have all the money front loaded in the first few years and then just pay them $1 million a year for the last 5-6 years of the contract.
No, but they knew what the budget was for the Predators, so they knew that this would crush them in their minds. And this is where you got to give David Poile credit, because he rallied the troops, all the investors, and basically got that last bit of money out of them to get Shea Weber. And in the end, it was such a good move for Nashville, and the Flyers may have forced them into it, but it really helped Nashville because it kind of showed that Nashville wasn't like a pushover or a bad Southern team in a lousy market. Like, it really kind of gave them some street cred, and then, the team got better. And so I think that this really helped them in their history, even though at the beginning we all thought it was like a mortal wound.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of reasons why the Flyers did it, in addition to trying to stick it to Nashville in a lot of ways, because obviously, Chris Pronger was now injured and was no longer with the team, really needed a defenseman to really be that strong backstop. And Weber was a really good candidate for that, to be honest. And he went on to have some really successful seasons. In that first season back after this whole thing went down, he had 49 points. He wound up having 56 points a couple of years later. Like, he was a really good defenseman that could have led the Flyers blue line.
Yeah, no, I think he's great. I mean, again, you got to look at the goal totals: 19, 23, 15, 20, 17. Like, he was a big time goal scorer with a big time shot and physical. So yeah, he was a top-notch defenseman in the league.
Yeah, and it was interesting, because, they obviously, we all know now, they wound up trading him to Montreal in 2016 as part of that PK Subban deal, that went down. That was a huge, huge moment in NHL trade history. And, we saw Montreal kind of get bogged down with that contract.
Yeah.
So it had a huge effect. Like, the Flyers making this offer sheet wound up having a huge effect on Montreal.
Yeah, in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about it that way. I think the biggest part of it that I think made Flyers fans nervous at the time, to me, was the compensation for matching the offer sheet. And that was 4 future first round draft picks.
Right.
Now, that's a lot of first rounders,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And you don't know, like, what years they would have been. I don't know that there was, like, a specific rule about that at the time, because the rules have changed since then.
I think they would have had to do them in concurrent years. I think. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess.
Yeah, so if you look at those first round draft picks that the Flyers made, I mean, honestly, the one that I'd be most upset about is probably Travis Sanheim. But
But
but the year after was the 2 picks with Provy and TK, so they would have only lost one of those 2 picks.
well, I don't look at it that way though, because Jeff
Well,
Keelty's different, and he would have picked different
yeah,
players.
true, true,
That's the
true.
only thing. But yeah, I mean, essentially, you'd be losing players like that.
Yeah,
It's
so
fair to say that.
it was Scott Lawton, Sam Morin, Travis Sanheim, and then Ivan Provorov / Travis Konecny. And those were the picks that the Flyers made. You could look at those drafts and obviously, look at other options that the Flyers could have had. But that's like kind of a separate discussion, because we're talking about them not having those picks. And it would have been real tough for the
Hmm.
Flyers to go those. It's not just those 4 years, because if you think of the cascading effect, that's really going to affect your team in a significant way for 8 to 10 years minimum.
Yeah, like as an example, if you're telling me to get into mine in Nashville, besides the Flyers not having Provorov, which again, even if you turn sour on him, he was excellent for a few years, 3, 4
Yeah.
years. They would have taken Werenski for
Mhm.
sure, because that's the Nashville kind of guy, and that's like a Shea Weber light. Like, it's really close, and that's just one pick. They would have had 3 others. So yeah,
Yeah. So I think that in the long run, I think it worked out for everybody involved that the Preds matched it. But I do enjoy the Shea Weber Philadelphia Flyers legend joke
yeah,
that we have. I just think that it's really just a seminal moment, I think, for all the teams involved here.
yeah. Oh, no question, and really more for Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to think, like, what the Flyers would have been with him, but having to basically build the rest of the team through free agency
Right, which is
for
harder to
this.
do.
Much harder to do and much more expensive when you're paying a guy that much in the first 4 years, like, to have to supplement around him with very limited space to do it. Now, this was in the real open checkbook era.
Right.
Let's be clear. It's not the
Oh
Chuck
yeah.
Fletcher open checkbook era.
No.
This was a different time. And so I think when you stack this up this is the Holmgren era. If you kind of stack that up with the other kind of big moves that Holmgren made, it just made for a very unstable time, I think,
Yeah.
in Flyers history, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely did. I mean, this was an era where, as an example, in 11, 12, Brad Richards was making 12 million. Brizgalov was making 10. Christian
Mhm.
Ehrhoff was making
Ugh.
10. LeCavier
That
was
was the
making
name.
Yeah, LeCavier was making 10. That's just an example.
So I think obviously that is a big moment in Flyers history. We are going to get to another couple of moments involving the 2008 NHL draft and a couple of goalies coming up next. It's summer, which always makes me think of baseball and soccer, and I want to be there to see it in person as much as possible. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting those tickets faster and easier, and prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last minute deals, views from your seat at their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying those coveted MLB tickets in your town, those summer concerts, and more. My favorite part of the Gametime app is that it's great for getting notified about last minute flash deals, and Gametime lets you save even more with zone deals where you pick a section and let Gametime choose the seat for you. Best of all, they have all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and your tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through email. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. You can find me there each and every Friday. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On Friday's show, we are going to talk prospects, and our friends over at Locked On NHL Prospects had some thoughts about the Flyers prospect pool as a whole. We're going to bring you their thoughts and then say what we think about what they had to say. So it should be a good back and forth without them being able to respond. So I love it for us. But getting back to these what if scenarios, in 2008, the Flyers sent a first round pick to the Capitals in exchange for Steve Eminger and a third round pick, 84th overall in exchange. And man, this could have changed things if the Flyers did not make this trade.
Tremendously.
Right?
Tremendously. If anybody remembers me sitting near me at that draft, I was dumbfounded because I knew they could have Carlson or Markstrom. They needed both at the time. Either one would have been great. But, I was favoring Carlson, and man, it was Steve Eminger, and it's like, no offense, he's a great scout now and everything, but back then he wasn't going to do anything for the Flyers, but they wanted a defenseman who could be tough. Well, you really paid the price, because either way, that would have been a good pick, whether it was Carlson or Markstrom, but Carlson obviously was the better pick. And how many games has he played as an all-star?
Yeah, I think, that draft is really interesting for a lot of reasons because the Flyers did have another first round pick, and that's why they felt like they could make this trade. They picked Lucas Sabisa famously in that draft, who, had a lot of potential but didn't really go anywhere. And the third rounder that is a completely forgettable goalie name who had 0 NHL starts it when all is said and done. So, and of course, like Steve Eminger is kind of like, God bless him, but did not amount to much
No.
after that. So it just looks bad in retrospect. And I think, like, at the time, I could see what the Flyers were thinking, in the sense that there's a lot of quality players that had gone in the last 8 picks or so before you get to that pick. And I can see, like, who got picked, later than that, other than, of course, Jacob Markstrom.
Those were the two guys. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I mean, those
It
were
was
the
the
two
first
guys.
pick in the second round. Jake Allen was picked. So the goalie that they wound up picking in the third round, they could have got 2 quality NHL level goalies with the pick that they already had.
Right.
And I think, Roman Josi was picked at 38 in that draft, which, oof. Like,
But that's
they
a
could have had
gutsy pick at the time.
Carlson. Totally.
Like
Totally.
Carlson, people like we all knew John
Yeah.
Carlson much better than we knew Roman Josi, to be fair, in hindsight.
Yes. And that's what's hard here is like, I think that if you look in hindsight, of course, and I think that, between Carlson and Markstrom, I see it. I see why the Flyers did it. I just think like it's just a difference of opinion here. I hate it. I hate that this is the decision that they made. And this what if, like, man, if we had
That
John
made it into my
Carlson,
draft article as like head scratcher. That was it. That was on.
yeah,
It's not on Sportsology anymore because we redesigned the site. But when it was up there, when we recapped me and this guy John Waldman, we were like, "This is a head scratcher. This was a bad trade."
yeah, and I think, if you look at maybe what the goals were of the Flyers at the time, blue liners weren't as important to them, but I don't know, man. I think
He
that
was a
there's
terrific
a
offensive defenseman. Like he just was. Like there's
yeah,
no
I
denying
know.
John Carlson. It's
I know.
like
Like, listen, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this
you
and be like,
can't.
why? Why?
I know. It's hard to. It's hard to, other than saying, okay, yes, we needed a big, crushing defenseman, a guy we need to be tough. So we don't need the obvious scoring type, which that's what John Carlson was, the obvious scoring type.
Yeah, and if you look at Carlson's development, he spent 1 year following in junior. Then the next year he did some AHL time and got bumped up to the NHL. He did play in World Juniors that year, so
Yep.
he played very late in the season for the Caps, and then was full time with the Caps the year after that. So it was a
Forever.
very yeah. So it's like he had a very fast development path for a defenseman.
Yep.
And I think you look at that and like at the time, Russ, would you have known that it would have been that quick of a
For
path?
Carlson, yeah, he was special. Like he wasn't special enough to go. Now, people might say, well, why was he picked down below? Because he wasn't a good defender, but his offense was special. Like it always was.
Mhm.
And he had to work on his defense. So that was the thing. At that time, offensive defensemen were still valuable, but not as valuable as they are now. So if they didn't have that complete game, then, teams would pass on you. So, that was the reason. But yes, no, everybody knew he, you go back to his London night record and you see that he had 76 points, 16 goals. Those were big numbers, offensive numbers for back then. In those playoffs, he had 22 points. If you go back even the year before with the Rockets, which everybody knows the New Jersey Rockets, he had 50 points, 12
Mhm.
goals. Like he had a big shot. That has not gone away. Like these things were all there. So it was known. Like there's plenty of times when I've been wrong about stuff, but this one, I just said it right at the time. It just like I was just, at that point in my career, I was getting better at what I was doing too. Early on, I made more mistakes than I made then. And this guy, I was like, wow. So,
You look at what happened, and Eminger only played 1 season with the Flyers in very limited capacity, and that was that. So I think that, man, to have had John Carlson, I think would have just made a huge difference.
just to give you an idea of how that draft was, some people were saying Drew Doughty shouldn't go up high because he's fat. Well, that was, because he didn't know how to eat. So the Kings took him because they were like, this guy's unbelievable, which he was, and they got him in
Yeah.
shape. And Drew Doughty's now an all-timer, right?
Right.
Bogosian was a guy who, again, developed quickly and also had the physical side besides the offense. So that's why he went so high. Everybody was looking like for the next Dion Phaneuf, that kind of that kind of guy.
Yeah.
So that's where, like Tyler Myers, big. Colton Tubert, I think he was 6'3" also, but he was.
Erik Karlsson was in that draft too.
Well, Erik Karlsson again should have gone higher. Like, and the Flyers took Luca Spiza. God bless him, great kid. He got rushed, if you remember, and I think he got rushed because of Pronger's injuries and stuff. And I got to tell you, he was a great kid. This draft was in Ottawa, and for some reason that year, nobody came from Philly. None of the beat writers crossed the border. So there's a picture, and I'll give it, if you want. I'll give it to us for the show. I'll give it to you, of just me interviewing Lucas Pisa. That's it. So he always remembered me. Now, there was a conference call where the other beat writers and such talked to Luca, but I was the only one there. That's it. It's a funny thing.
All right, we have one more deal to talk about. It's the goalie deal. We'll do that and answer some of your mailbag questions coming up next.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right. So, Russ, when we talked about this ahead of time, this was the one that I think you were most excited to talk about.
If there was sports talk, there was like, a website for me to write about at that time, because mine didn't come out for a couple more years, I would have written pages about this. Pages.
Yeah. So let's talk about Mike Richter versus John Vanbiesbrouck and what that choice was for the Flyers and GM at the time, Bobby Clarke.
Yeah. So the situation was, Mike Richter's contract was coming to a close. He was going to be an impending free agent. They had the expansion draft, and Nashville took him. So technically, Mike Richter is an original Predator. But the Predators weren't going to sign Mike Richter, and so they basically
they picked 3 goalies in the expansion draft.
Right. So basically, they just worked a deal. They knew when they picked Richter, if Richter went and got re-signed by the Rangers, they would get a compensatory pick, and then the Rangers gave him a second-round pick too. But there was a time period where the Flyers could have traded a pick to get Mike Richter if they wanted to, and Nashville could have traded him to them, and they could have negotiated with him. And Mike Richter's from the area, and I think if they would have wooed him, I just had this feeling at that point in his career, Mike would have done it, because Mike has talked about the Flyers before, even though he's a lifetime Ranger. He's from Flowertown. He loved when he grew up. He loved playing hockey around the Philly area. He still talks about it. I think he could have been wooed, and they didn't do it. And they ended up getting John Vanbiesbrouck. And I was like, it's too little too late. Like, I knew it at that time because I knew both guys really well as far as players. And I was like, boy, this was maybe a big missed opportunity. Not a guarantee, but a missed opportunity to at least try.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point. Obviously, it's hard to compare these two guys' careers overall because Vanbiesbrouck played a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, Mike Richter had an injury that prevented him from playing a few additional years that he probably would have. But if you look at it at the time, like, you're right, Richter was a much better goaltender at the time, and it just seemed to make a lot more sense. And the fact that they've been willing to, we've just talked about the Flyers being spending money like they were printing it, and they just didn't this time. And I wonder, why that is.
I don't either. And I heard there was only like I don't remember the exact salaries, so I'm not going to state it. But I think Richter only ended up getting paid $1 million more than Vanbiesbrouck. Like, that's it. And I was just like, wow. To me, I just basically was saying the Flyers just cheaped out. They just did. They went for the older, cheaper goalie, and it showed. And it took a little while for that to show up for Vanbiesbrouck, and it did, because he started out really well, and I thought he had
Yeah.
a decent season for the most part, but then it started to tail off. And I think that was the part where it was like, yeah, that was when, they should have had Richter, because Richter had a really good year on a lesser team. The Flyers were a much better team. I looked at the differential. The Flyers were plus 35. The Rangers were minus 10. So I would have just, if I were the Flyers, I would have been right on the phone with Nashville saying, what do you want for Richter? We'll take him off your hands. The same way that,
Yeah.
any other team would. And Nashville ended up, they were smart. They got picks out of it. And the Rangers got their goalie back. But this is one where the Flyers, if they were aggressive, I think could have gotten them.
Yeah, and you look at the 2 seasons that Vanbiesbrouck played for the Flyers, where he played 62 games in his first season, went down to 50 in the second season, which we could see him like tailing off at that
Yeah.
point,
Oh, yeah.
right? But his save percentage was actually higher in that second season, which is interesting. But it was probably because he got a few more sheltered starts
Yes.
than he would have
I think that's what it was.
otherwise.
Yeah.
But I do think that,
I think
he
the
did the
Flyers could have gone
job, but
far with Richter. With the team they had,
yeah,
had they gotten
yeah.
Richter, I think they could have gone really far.
And they would have been able to continue further, like
Yes.
in Richter's career,
Yeah.
because I mean, you play this what if scenario, and he wouldn't have gotten that injury if he was on the Flyers,
Right.
right?
Yeah, because it
I
was a
mean,
skull fracture. It was a freak
yeah.
injury, and I covered
Mhm.
when Richter got it, and I covered it, unfortunately, when he was, said he couldn't play anymore, because, he
Right.
basically had, he was getting post-concussion and all that. So, yeah,
Right.
you can play that what if game, and this was to me, one of the bigger what ifs. Like, I always would wonder what would have happened.
Yeah, this is the one where I'm like, this absolutely, like Carlson, you can say it would have made a huge difference, but I think with the goaltending position, that could be a cup versus not a cup.
Right, and that's what I was thinking, like, wow, if they land Richter, because there was, I think it was like a 3-week period before the Rangers got Richter back after the expansion draft. Maybe it was only 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 days, who knows? But there was a little bit of a period. There was a window, however small that window or big that window was, and, didn't happen.
Yep, always Nashville. It always seems to be Nashville that we're talking about in
Yeah,
these
they're the 6th
scenarios.
degree here.
All right, we have a few of your mailbag questions to wrap up today's show. And Guido Valenti, who's been a member of our community for a very long time, had a question. Do you think the Flyers will give a chance to Rodrigo Abels to make the team?
I do think they'll give him a chance. I think he'll play heavy in the preseason. The only thing is, I think he has to be in the bumper position on the power play.
Mhm.
He's good in that. I can't tell you that's what Rocky Thompson's going to do. It's really hard for me to figure out what Rocky Thompson's going to do based on what he hasn't done. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Play him there in the preseason. If you see some good things, you keep him up and you find a spot for him, because you need that help on the power play. Will that happen? I can't guarantee it, but I think that's his opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's really there to kinda push the other guys in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And so I just don't see them sacrificing a roster spot to somebody already established for him. I think he's a good call-up option.
Okay.
So, Joe Mackery, on why the Flyers don't have a prospect tournament. We talked about this last Friday, and he's suggesting that they're afraid that their bad drafting and rebuild will be exposed in such a tournament. What do you say to that?
No, I don't. That's really not the reason. Look, they they know what they have. They know what they don't have. They're obviously higher on, their players than you are, and probably than I am on, in some degree, as far as not so much the players, the development. The development still needs work in the Flyers organization. So would this be why? No. No, this wouldn't be why. I think just the reason, again, like we had stated, I think the reason why is, for some reason, maybe Lehigh didn't want it. It's their rink. If they didn't make money on it, maybe they decided no. But this is one where I think the Flyers, if they went in with other teams, it wouldn't be so much about making money. It would just be like, how much is it going to cost us? But this development, which again costs millions of dollars for players, like if you put a tag on what it takes to get a player from the, draft table to the NHL, it's sometimes millions of dollars. So this is just a small investment, your investment in this tournament to get these guys rolling and give everybody else another look at them before you send them off in a game type situation. To me, that's more valuable than making money. But again, you're talking about an AHL franchise that's, looking to make money. So that's probably what the difference was.
Yeah. Yeah. I can totally see that. But I think that they would match up. I mean, everybody has good and bad prospects, or like
Correct.
better prospects than others. So I don't think it would have made a big issue
No.
there. Speaking of those prospect tournaments, Jason wanted to know what Flyers prospects other than Mitchkov do you think would benefit the most from such a tournament?
Jet Luchenko. Jet Luchenko needs to
Yeah.
work on this. We've talked about what he needs to work on in his game. Those things would be big in his game. Spencer Gill. I mean, everybody from this year's draft. Berglund may not
Right.
be able to do it because he might have to go over early. That's fine. You don't worry about Berglund. He's playing pro already, so that's fine. But it's the guys that are going back to juniors.
Right. And I think that if you look at how some of these guys did in the World Junior Summer Showcase, you want to give them an opportunity to
Work on
continue
that.
right?
Yep.
And build on it. And you could say, okay, here's what you did in Dev Camp. Here's what you improved on in the Summer Showcase. Let's keep building on that. And
Right.
in these rookie tournaments, in game ready scenarios. And I think that's the big part of it.
It is. That is a big part of it. And that's important.
Yeah, I think so. All right. That will do it for today's show. We'll be back on Friday with our reaction to the Locked On NHL prospects. Look at the Flyers prospect poll, plus your poll results on the Flyers merchandising and how you think they are doing. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got a question you want us to answer on the show, let us know on Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day, everyone.